Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the Rise with Anita podcast. If you're tuning in today, I want you to know I don't believe it's by accident. This is a conversation likely your higher self has been trying to have with you. And today, we're finally listening. So, this episode is for the woman who might be feeling stuck, not because she's not doing enough, but because she's trying to breathe life into a version of herself that is already energetically complete. So let's talk about what happens when the identity you built, the one that's kept you safe, the one that got you here, no longer serves where you're going. So here's the thing most people in the transformation space don't talk about. Transformation isn't always loud. It isn't sexy. Sometimes it comes in the form of a heartbreak or grief, or it can look like a full-blown identity death and rebirth. Because the version of you that got you to this level, the overachiever, the perfectionist, the peacemaker, the hustler, she did her job. And now her chapter is closed. And it's not because she's wrong, but rather because she's complete. So let's pause on that. Think about your own life for a second. Maybe you used to be the girl who, like me, has had every planner and every calendar and all your steps mapped out. You were the one who was reliable, the fixer, emotional responder in every room. And now, even showing up to some of the spaces feels like friction. You're exhausted, and it's not just physical, but energetically. Why? Because your soul is already done performing a role you've mastered. And here's where we get stuck. We think that because something feels hard or confusing, or we don't have motivation, it's that we're broken. In fact, a lot of times we can feel like if there's resistance to this next level, I have resistance to whatever it is I want to do, then maybe we've lost our edge or the power is not within us. But what if your soul just outgrew your last assignment? What if it's not actually a crisis, but actually it's a confirmation? You're not confused. You're just unaligned with the expired version of you. The identity that might have been built on survival, on people pleasing, on achieving your worth, on proving yourself. Does this hit? Because I know I've been there. For the longest time, I've had moments of this identity who wanted to prove herself. I wanted to show that the statistics of how I grew up were far from the truth of the person I was. Or in certain relationships, I was playing by rules that weren't necessarily fair in order to people please my way into keeping that relationship. But I finally got to a point where I realized I don't have to prove my worth for love. In fact, that entire version of me was built on survival mode. So that identity that might have been built on survival and this constant rabbit hole race of how do I prove myself rather than how do I come into who I already am. There's such a shift in energies between those two, isn't there? And here's the thing I realized. We get to a place where our bodies, our spirit, our soul starts to crave something even deeper. It looks like peace, fulfillment, integrity, alignment. These aren't just words. And this is where your new identity starts forming. Not because you're burning the old version of you to the ground in shame, but because you start to bless her. You've thanked her and let her go. You thank her for the lessons. You thank her for actually being your guiding post when you needed her. Interestingly enough, over the weekend, I started to go back and look at photos of myself in my youth. And I have a lot of those photos buried. And I realized as I looked at this younger version of me, where at parts I felt broken, but do not twist my words. I felt broken, but I was not. However, I did not allow myself to feel my own wholeness in that era. I realized how I'm carrying her to this day, how me growing into this full expansion version of myself still honors that little girl and the teen. And so when I'm telling you, as you shift through these identities, you have to move past that version of you. Doesn't mean you don't carry that version with you. It then goes into the identity of who is now making my decisions moving forward. Is it the 18, 19-year-old Anita, for an example, that used to emotionally suppress and did not know how to actually communicate what it is she desired? Or is it the 30, 31-year-old version of her who sees a life of abundance, a life of impact, and a life of service while incorporating emotional tools and techniques to help her self regulate? Because one thing I realized, we all have versions of ourselves that are trying to have us make decisions. And if we're not cautious, we can be looking at our old identities and trying to create from that place. So I want you to go ahead and think about things that you used to tolerate. It might be the way you used to overextend, or you shrunk or dimmed. And it's not because you were weak, but because you didn't know how powerful your truth could be. But now you do. Another moment I had recently is I was looking at a past vision board. In fact, it's one that I'm going to take down. And as I was looking at it, I realized about half of those dreams at different points in my lives, when I look back, weren't even mine. They were survival strategies disguised as ambition. because in my culture, and I saw this in a podcast yesterday, funny enough, in our culture, it's like doctor, lawyer, failure, or jeweler. But culturally, and this speaks to my Armenian heritage, by the way, we end up having this mentality of not chasing for what we truly desire. We go for what's safe or what feels certain in that moment. And so there's a little bit of generational rewiring that needs to be done. I realized as I was reviewing these vision boards that wanting to make X amount, insert whatever here, it might be for you, was not because it was soul aligned, but because it was a number that proved I wasn't a failure. I was proving my worth and my identity through the actions I was taking for my career, for how I was perceived. And there was a bit of me that was still trying to prove my worth to a few of those key family members because they were survival instincts. Who am I if I don't prove myself to prove that I deserve a space, prove that I deserve to be seen in my full authenticity? So, this is what this season is about: burning off what's no longer aligned, even if it used to work. So, if you've been feeling like you're unraveling and maybe you're just releasing what no longer fits, the rebirth, it's not about becoming someone now. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Because what I realized when I looked back at those photos of the younger version of myself, to an extent, I've always known who I am. I just did not know how it would manifest. And as a fun little journal prompt, I want you to go ahead and ask yourself today, what version of me am I still trying to keep alive that no longer represents who I really am? And more importantly, what identity am I finally ready to step into without apology, without explanation, just full ownership of who you actually are? Really sit with it. And if you feel emotional, that's proof that you're accessing your truth. So if this episode hit home, I want you to know you are not alone in this evolution. I am still constantly evolving, and my identity has been more active than ever in the last 12 weeks. And as a reminder, I recently received, you are not late. You are right on time. Your shedding is sacred. The void is just a portal. So if this message moves something in you, share it with a woman who's currently in her own in between. And if you feel called, screenshot the episode, tag me on Instagram, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for being here. And thank you for starting to remember who you are. See you in the next one.